Hey, good morning, Horizon Church, and welcome to Monday of week 5 of our little Lenten series that we're doing. And morning, Estella. And yeah, we could use some sun. It'd be cool. Except we need the rain, so I'm glad for that as well. So what we're going to do for the remaining 2 weeks, we're now 2 weeks away from Easter, and it's in the way we do our lives, a lot of us will really only be in church on the Sundays. We'll be in church maybe on this coming Sunday, Palm Sunday, and hopefully you'll stick around for our egg hunt afterwards. And then a lot of us, just because of our lives and our schedules and works, won't be in church again until the following Sunday when we celebrate Easter. And it's really to get to Easter, you have to go through the events of Easter week and Holy Week. That's why it's a busy week around churches, and it'll be busy here. You can't get to Easter without going through Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday, and then waking up on Easter Sunday morning and celebrating the resurrection. So what we're going to do for the next 2 weeks during these times that we have together is we're actually going to walk through John's gospel, starting in chapter 13, where John has the longest account of the last night, the Last Supper. I don't know if it's fair to call it that, but the last night that Jesus had with his disciples. And we're just going to walk through the events and try to put ourselves there, try to place ourselves in the events of the Last Supper that Jesus had. John's the only gospel that gives the story of the foot washing. We're going to read that in just a second because that's where it opens in John chapter 13. John does not include the traditional communion story. That's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They tell the story of the institution of what we call communion, celebrating the Last Supper. And there are some issues in trying to fit John's story in with the others, but they're resolvable. But that's what we're going to do, and we're going to start right at the beginning in John chapter 13. And John really, the people who Bible scholars who look at John, in some ways, John's gospel, once you get to chapter 13 of John, you're now at Holy Week. You're at the last night, the Last Supper that Jesus has. And John chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 are all accounts of that last meal that Jesus had. So we will just work our way through. And I'm going to start in John chapter 13, right at the beginning. I'm going to start with the foot washing. And let me just read it and then just talk about it briefly. So John chapter 13, it starts this way. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and to return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he'd come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You do not understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will." "No," Peter protested, "you will never, ever wash my feet." And Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you don't belong to me." And Simon Peter exclaimed, "Then wash my hands and my head as well, Lord, not just my feet." So I want to talk about that. And what I want to encourage you to do, good morning, Angelica. What I want to encourage you to do today is to, not look at that as a story that we get to dissect and talk about and fill in the details. But I want you to imagine yourself, if you can, imagine yourself in that room. Imagine yourself watching Jesus wash the other disciples' feet. We know you've been around church, those of you who are here long enough to know the story of the foot washing and to know that idea that in that culture, in that country, really for most cultures, at that particular time for a long, long period of history. Uh, Foot washing was just an extraordinarily common thing. Everybody did it, but it was usually, well, I would say almost always reserved for the servants to do. We have zero accounts. We have none. We have no accounts of any rabbi washing his disciples' feet, of anybody of prominence washing somebody else's feet. There are a few accounts of children washing their parents' feet, none of parents washing their children's feet. We have a story of a wife wanting to wash her husband's feet, and he resisted. Um, it's unheard of to have the person of greater status wash the feet of somebody of lower status. Just never happened. Because it's just such a dirty, humbling experience to have your foot washed. So it's there's a lot of resistance and to this idea, and so I want you to imagine yourself sitting there in that room watching Jesus wash feet as he slowly comes to you, and having to allow Jesus to wash your feet and washing them. We did last year when we do this, the Good Friday service. We have stations set up. Um, and you go from station to station. It's kind of self-guided. You read a little thing, and sometimes there are activities that you do at each station. And last year, for the first year, I've never done this before, but we had a foot washing station. And I had this set up, and you read the story of the foot washing. And I had a bowl and water, and I sat there from 12 to 3 prepared to wash people's feet. And as you read through the instructions, as you read through, the little guide, it talked about that, and it said, I don't remember exactly how I said it, but it said that if you want that I would wash your feet. Now, I don't remember how many people we had go through that whole experience last year. Usually maybe 30-ish people show up and go through that. And of those 30 people, I think I washed the feet of only about 5. I don't think it was more than 5 people who wanted their feet washed. And it was really kind of fascinating um, to participate in that, to sit there for 3 hours, and only 5 people said they wanted their foot washed. And that's okay. I get it. It wasn't, it was something that was offered. And here's the thing, when it was over the next couple of days, I had several people say to me, wow, they said, I wanted to have my feet washed. I just couldn't get myself to do it. 2 or 3 people talked about the fact that they went through and they thought about it, and they went to the next station. They were going to come back, and 1 or 2 people said, I left and thought maybe I should go back and have my feet washed. There were 2 people who spent a ton of time here, and both of them said to me after, I really wanted to have my feet washed. But these are 2 people who did have their feet washed. They said, I really wanted to have my feet washed, but um, it was hard. It was hard to let you do that. And both of them said, I spent a lot of time at the other stations. I went back, after reading the foot washing, I went back to others. One person spent more than an hour at another station. They went back to another station, just in more than an hour, just preparing themselves, saying, can I let Pastor Bud do this? Can I let the pastor wash my feet? And just kind of mentally preparing themselves before they came over for a foot washing. And most of the people who talked to me about that afterwards, and who said, man, what a struggle. Most of them said something like, the fact it was you, they said, the fact that I'm letting you do this. And the struggle was, I don't know, I don't know what it is, what I'm doing wrong or whatever, but right, I don't know. But their struggle was, can I let this person wash my feet? And those two people, like I said, those two people who really, really struggled, who spent over an hour, one person, the other wasn't that long, but spent over an hour just composing herself and just saying, "Can I do this?" And then eventually let me wash her feet. I know that there are some churches who have foot washing services, um, and I identify with this. We're not, just so you know, by the way, that's not going to be part of this year's experience for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of stuff going on. We have yeah, I'm not even going to get into it, but I just can't sit here 12 to 3 again during this year. So we're not going to do it. We'll have other experiences that we do, and maybe another year we'll return to the foot washing. But in case you're wondering and anxious, don't let you stay away. We're not going to do that this year. But it's the concept of you have to let somebody else do this, and that's what Peter struggled with. It wasn't that he was opposed to foot washing. Peter would have had his feet washed tons of times. Everybody did. You came into a house for any kind of a meal, and there'd be somebody there at the door who washed your feet. Peter experienced that. It was never a big deal. It was the who. So I want you to kind of put yourself in that place and ask yourself, would you let Jesus wash your feet? And if you can, just maybe grab a chair at some point today. And I have my ringer off, but my phone keeps illuminating. Just sit in a chair and imagine yourself. Would you let Jesus wash your feet? And Jesus said to Peter, and this is why this is important as we head towards Easter. Jesus said to Peter, he said, you don't understand now what I'm doing. And I know it doesn't make any sense for you. You don't understand now, but you will someday. And what Jesus was getting at, what Jesus was trying to help Peter understand, was that Jesus was headed towards the cross, and he would allow himself to be crucified and executed. He would walk through those events for the sake of us, for the sake of Peter and James and John and Matthew and Mark and everybody else. The women who were there, the Marys, um, he would do this for them, and he's teaching them, you're going to have to let me do this. You're going to have to accept my death on your behalf. And I think, it's an odd thing for a lot of us. We've heard this story so many times that we're used to the concept of Jesus dying for us. But the concept of letting Jesus wash our feet is a little bit more difficult, maybe, for you. But it's preparation. It's heading towards Easter. It's preparation. So my suggestion for you today, sometime, grab a seat and sit there and just imagine Jesus washing your feet. Um, Put yourself in the story. Imagine Jesus taking off your shoes, your socks, and then washing your feet. We don't have the practical need to have our feet washed like they did. We don't have dusty roads, with sandals, etc. Or our feet, we arrive grimy and we're going to be having a meal. But the concept is still there, that Jesus insists that he clean us up. So as we head towards Easter, this week, all week long, we're going to walk through John's account of the Last Supper, but it starts with this idea that we have to be willing to let Jesus clean us up, and in very practical ways, that can be difficult because we let Jesus into the dirtiest, ugliest parts of ourselves, and Jesus insists that we have to do that. So today, at some point, grab a chair and sit there and imagine that Jesus insists on washing your feet. Because in order to follow Jesus, we have to allow him to die for us and clean us up. And that's where we're headed this week, during and next, as we head towards Easter. So let me pray, and then we can get on with our days. And we'll return to this again tomorrow, walking through the stories of John's account of the last night with his disciples. So let me pray. Father, thank you for the opportunity that we have these next 2 weeks to try to enter into this account, this story of Jesus and the last evening that he spent with his friends, with his disciples. God, it's a hard thing for us to humble ourselves, to let Jesus into all the dirty parts of ourselves, all the nooks and crannies and things that we hide. We're familiar with the story. We know that Jesus died for us. But when it gets much more intimate, when Jesus wants to actually wash our feet, it's a little bit harder for us to humble ourselves and let him do that. So, Father, I pray that you'd enable us to experience that humbling, that humility of letting Jesus into all the parts of our lives. Thank you for his willingness to do so. And as we head towards Easter, God, I pray that you'd begin preparing our hearts and our minds, our bodies and our souls, so that we can celebrate Resurrection Day personally. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. Hope you have a great Monday. Doesn't look like it's going to be sunny, Estella. Maybe later. I don't know. But hope you have a great day. Love you all. Goodbye.